of Valentines, Folly, an ANN short story, written and narrated by Lisa Kay. The sun was raised high above the beautiful metropolis that was the city of Aurora. The air was crisp with a slight chill, a sign that there were still a few more months of cold weather to endure. Half-melted snow lined the concrete sidewalks, with a few residual puddles of murky slush that any unfortunate soul could splash into if they weren't careful. And yet, despite the cold and gloomy atmosphere that had been present for a few months, this particular day brought a sense of excitement and hope for a lucky few. To put it simply, love was in the air. Within the northern sector of Aurora was its bustling business district. Tall skyscrapers and other shiny buildings lay neatly next to each other. People donned in sleek winter coats walked swiftly and with purpose across the streets, ready for another day at work. Among this cluster of buildings was a standout, a large, shiny gray building with up to 20 floors, it seemed like. At the top of this massive infrastructure was the name of the company that owned it. Mounted along one of the walls were 3 big letters in a sleek white, orange, and blue font. ANN, the Aurora News Network. At a pedestrian crossing, a group of citizens entered the grand halls of the building, forming a perfect line to the receptionist's desk, each worker showing their ANN press card, allowing them to proceed and walk off to their respective divisions. One of these employees was significantly shorter than the rest, their height being compensated for by 2 olive green-colored horns atop their head. This employee was Andy Helm, cameraman for the Aurora News Network. Andy was classified as a bullhorn human, one of the many variations of humans that existed in this world. They had light green skin and a bush of slightly unkempt brown hair that covered one side of their face. A noticeable detail about their hair were the tips of bright, almost neon teal dyed hair. They had a white ANN branded cap with the same orange and blue lettering. In terms of clothing, they wore layers of maroon flannel and a puffy brown vest with multiple pockets. Despite being dressed nice and snug, Andy's cheeks were tinted a darker hue of green, a result of walking through the streets of Aurora through the bitter winds. In spite of this, they were glad to have finally made it to work, where the warm air of the large radiators brought some relief after a hectic morning. Once they passed security, Andy made their way to an elevator and pressed the button with an arrow pointing up. After only a few minutes of waiting, a small ding could be heard and the doors opened. Andy, along with some other folks, walked through, each taking turns pushing buttons to the floor they needed to be on. Andy, having to squeeze between 2 tall woodland humans, pushed the button for the 8th floor, more specifically, the ANN broadcasting studio. The elevator door closed, sending the workers up to their respective floors. Another day at ANN had just begun. When Andy made it to their floor, they stepped out of the elevator and took a moment looking around the room. As a member of the broadcasting department, Andy spent most of their time in ANN's broadcasting studio, which, one would say, was the busiest floor in the entire building. Andy could see a few people packing up their things, most likely having to take on the grueling late-night shift a few hours prior, and were getting ready to leave. But overall, the studio was already abuzz with activity. Anchors were getting the last touches of hairspray and makeup to look picture-perfect for the morning report. Camera operators had their headsets on, pushing buttons, flicking switches, and positioning their cameras to the right spot. Chatter among staff writers and editors could be heard, discussing the schedule and what stories would be covered for the day. These were all familiar sights, characteristics of the studio Andy had grown used to as simply being part of the landscape, so to speak. One thing that Andy couldn't ignore, however, was the slight hint of pink that had enveloped the studio. Red, white, and pink streamers could be seen hung up on the ceiling. Paper hearts were taped to the walls, some of which had cheesy pickup lines written on them. Lines of garland with pink hearts framed doors. Andy let out a small sigh, as they knew the meaning behind these decorations. It was February 14th, Valentine's Day. The bullhorn didn't necessarily hate Valentine's Day, but they also didn't, love it either. For one, the constant build-up to the holiday all month long was pestering at best and irritating at worst. From the commercials with seductive music and annoyingly attractive couples, to trailers for the hottest new rom-com about to hit theaters, avoiding anything involving Valentine's was near impossible. If anything, it was more so just an embarrassing reminder of what the bullhorn still lacked in their life. Before they could get completely lost in their thoughts, Andy stiffened when they felt 2 bright teal-colored arms from behind wrap around their shoulders, but relaxed almost immediately when the gesture was then followed by a familiar-sounding voice. Boo! A bubbly voice called from behind that made Andy turn around.
Cece, isn't it a bit too early for that? Andy said with a small smile growing on their face as they playfully patted their hands against her arms. The mysterious person that pranked them had a bright teal complexion and was wearing a light pink cashmere sweater, white skinny jeans, and light tan boots. The thing of note about this one was her round spherical head, which was not only flipped upside down, but completely detached from her neck and floating in place, surrounded by an almost gelatinous-like watery fluid. This was Cece Gray, one of the head weather reporters for ANN's broadcasting department.
Sorry, I just couldn't help myself. You're way too easy to surprise. Cece replied in a playfully defensive tone as she pulled her arms away.
Well, good morning to you too, I guess. You're looking quite festive today.
Andy remarked, noticing how she wore an attire that was quite different to what she would normally wear. Oh, thanks for noticing. Just thought I'd switch it up a bit, seeing that it's Valentines and all. I couldn't say the same about you, though. Cece replied, smoothing out her sweater bashfully with her hands.
Hey, maroon is pink adjacent, isn't it? I'd say I'm pretty close. Andy scoffed sarcastically. This was just the kind of lighthearted banter the two often got into, and it was the kind that always managed to give Andy a bit of a pep in their step on such busy days.
Before they could continue with their conversation, the elevator behind them dinged, followed by the click of heels against the floor.
Good morning, everyone! Another familiar, albeit more energetic, enthusiastic-sounding voice called out to all those who could hear it. Look alive, people, another busy day ahead of us. The booming words came from none other than Winona Specs, reporter and lead director of ANN's morning news program. She was a typical-looking human, with curly blonde hair that went down just below her shoulders. She had light pink skin and a set of oval glasses that sat in front of her wide gray eyes. Much like Cece, Winona also appeared to be dressed for Valentines. Unlike her typical purple wardrobe, she wore a red and white knit sweater atop a white turtleneck. She also had a maroon pleated skirt, white stockings, and black heels. Her sweater even had tiny red hearts for buttons.
Morning, Winona,
Andy replied. While Andy always considered Cece to be one of their closest friends, they still had a special bond with the blonde-haired journalist. Winona was the first friend Andy had made when they first moved to Aurora nearly 4 years ago. She was a reliable companion for Andy, as moving to the biggest city in the world was nothing short of a daunting task. Not to mention, meeting Winona brought a great deal of excitement and hope for their new life. Who knew that in the span of a week, Andy would have witnessed a Christmas fair set ablaze by a pyromaniac, meet an entire friend group of people, and get caught up in a conspiracy with cyborgs? Those memories are still very fresh in their head, as if it had occurred yesterday.
Morning, you two lovebirds. Cece, mind if I steal your walking teddy bear for a sec? I've got to give them a rundown of all the assignments for today.
Winona requested, leaving Andy stunned and their cheeks burning a dark green shade. Cece, meanwhile, didn't seem to notice Winona's romantic choice of language.
Alrighty then. I better get going too. I need to check in with Lysander on our weather predictions for this week, Cece said in her usual perky tone. I'll catch you guys later. Before she turned heel, she gave a light pat on Andy's shoulder as a way of saying goodbye.
I'll see ya, Andy muttered awkwardly, their words suddenly caught in their throat.
And once Alistair finishes his interview, I'll need you at the police station to cover last night's bank heist. Then, you'll meet with me at the park to grab some footage on the construction of the new garden. And once that's all done with, we'll head back here for our debrief with Belle, and you'll supervise the interns. Simple as that, right? Winona rambled on in her office, pacing back and forth with a clipboard in her hand as she listed off all of Andy's jobs for the day. Andy took it all in silently, their minds still going back to what Winona said, calling them and Cece lovebirds. What did you mean this morning? About what? Winona paused from her ramble with a curious stare in her eyes. About me and Cece. You think that we're... Winona's eyes widened and her face slightly blushed embarrassingly. Oh, God, I'm really sorry if that made you uncomfortable. I was just joking, honest. Although, you gotta admit, anyone could mistake you two for dating with the way you guys are around each other. I've told you, we're not dating. Cece and I are just good friends, that's all.
At least, that's what I think we are. Andy looked away with a hint of a solemn stare. Winona remained silent, until a thought popped up in her head. Wait, you have a crush on her, don't you? Winona inquired suddenly, with a slightly smug grin growing on her face. What did I just say? Maybe? I guess? I don't know, alright? Do I think she's sweet and funny and just all around a great person with the most heartwarming laugh in the world? Sure, but I don't know. A crush just, it doesn't describe it. Andy replied, raising their voice out of pure exasperation. And even if I did, how would I know if she feels the same? As much as they could try to convince themselves, good friend just wasn't the right label for the two's relationship. They knew each other so well and enjoyed being in each other's company. Hell, Cece was really the only person Andy was comfortable being physically close with. So if they weren't friends, then what were they? Well, have you ever thought about asking her out? You should totally ask her out after work tonight, Winona suggested. Why in the world would I do that? Well, not like as a date, just you two spending the night in each other's company. And perhaps you could bring up the idea of dating. I don't know. I wouldn't want to make things awkward for her, and I'd just be putting her on the spot, asking her something so sudden. Ask her not. Do what you think is right. I still think spending some quality time with her would be nice. You never know what could happen, Winona said in a calmer, more encouraging voice. Well, where would I even take her? The only places we've hung out at are Gilbert's Burger Corner, the park, and those aren't really the most romantic spots for a date, Andy contemplated. Well, funny you mention that. You see, Francine and I had planned to go out for dinner at the Velvet Inn. You know, the really fancy restaurant just a few blocks from here. Andy started to get an idea of what Winona was suggesting, which made them slightly nervous. Wait, you're not saying that... I could make some rearrangements. No, you wouldn't. Put the reservation under your name instead. No. And you and Cece can have a romantic dinner together. Winona finally finished with a glint in her eyes. Coming up with plans on the spot was one of Winona's specialties, a specialty that always concerned and impressed all those around her. No, there is no way I'm going to piss off Francine of all people just to go out with Cece. She might actually murder me if I steal your guys' night out. Andy exclaimed, the image of Francine being utterly and totally livid sent chills down their spine. She's not gonna murder you. I'll talk some sense in her and I can guarantee she'll be on board. Winona tried reassuring Andy. Andy stood there, lost in thought as they thought about Winona's idea. And the more they thought about it, the idea of a date sounded fun. And it would help clear the air over how they felt about Cece. And hey, best case scenario, them and Cece could end up being an actual couple. That's how it usually works, didn't it? You know what? Screw it. I'll give it a shot, Andy said. That's the spirit, buddy. I'll fill you on the deets once I talk to Francine, but it's probably not going to take that long to convince her. And don't worry, we'll pay for you guys, Winona exclaimed, exiting her office with a little skip, leaving Andy sighing and with a fuzzy feeling in their chest. A real date. With Cece. They still couldn't believe it. Even if Winona described it as not technically being a date, they still thought of it as such. Andy left the office, wondering how they would manage to get through the rest of the day. Look, as much as I'm all for helping our sweet little Andy realize their not-so-platonic feelings for Cece, this crosses the line. The slightly agitated voice of Francine Rickdom exclaimed to Winona in the break room. Francine was the last puzzle of this little friend group. She was director of the marketing department, being the one handling the more business side of things for ANN. Much like Winona, she was a common human with a similarly pinkish skin tone, albeit slightly darker. She had shiny, straight red hair that was tied up into a half ponytail. She wore a dark magenta top with puffy sleeves, tan-colored skinny jeans, and black heels. She also had a few gold bracelets and a necklace to complete the look. While on most days she would be calm and collected, her face, albeit slightly concealed by her long bangs, suggested otherwise. Please, Francine, just this once. It'll be so good for those two. Winona practically pleaded to her girlfriend, her hands interlocked in an almost prayer-like motion. Do you have any idea how long it took for me to get that reservation? How many hours I've spent on the phone waiting just to get a chance at making sure we have a perfect night? I get that you want to play matchmaker and help Andy with their little situationship,
crush whatever it is, but why does it have to be like this?
Please, I never asked for anything, and besides, there's plenty of other restaurants we can go to tonight. Why are you so hung up about this one? Winona demanded to know. Francine had always been the stubborn type, always going off on her own path and rarely hearing other people out, at least on the first try. But Winona was kind of confused as to why Francine was being more stubborn than usual. I just wanted tonight to be perfect for us. One night where we could just spend time together and not have to worry about work or anything, really. I thought that's what you wanted too. And you're so willing to give it up? Just like that? Francine explained, her voice being toned down to a calmer but slightly disappointed tone. Winona could sort of understand Francine's mindset. She did indeed want to have a, quote, perfect night with Francine. Their journey to becoming partners was pretty rocky, to put it simply. Their first attempt at dating was years ago, ending in a really bad breakup, and left behind a constant air of awkwardness between them for years on end. A will-they-won't-they type of dynamic that everyone knew them for. It only took very recently for Winona and Francine to even consider trying again, after years of growing, maturing, and working out their personal issues. It was overall a smooth process, but much like every other couple, they had their disagreements from time to time. Of course I do, and I really appreciate you putting in the work of doing this. But I've told you this before. I don't need these grand gestures of affection all the time to know that you care about me. No matter how much or how little time we spend, it won't make me love you any less. Winona reassured, reaching for Francine's hand to give it a gentle squeeze. And with Andy and Cece, I just want them to have that chance of connecting. If they end up wanting to try dating, then that's great. If not, then that's fine too. What matters is that they had that chance. And isn't that what we wanted? To have that chance? I only see fit that we give them that opportunity too. Francine looked to the side, the gears in her head in motion as she thought about Winona's request. She finally let out a sigh, and out of nowhere, squished her hands against Winona's cheeks. You really have a way with words, Winnie. All right, I'll call the inn and put in a new reservation under an Andy Helm. Probably shouldn't take too long. Francine reassured, leaving Winona with a big fat grin on her face. She grabbed Francine's hands and leaned her face forward to give her a little peck on the lips. Oh, thank you. You're actually the best, hun, Winona exclaimed triumphantly. So then, what do you want to do tonight? We can always find another place to go out, she then asked. You know what? How about we just crash at my place, order some pizza, and we can watch a movie? What's that one called? Prejudice and Pride? Francine suggested. Sounds perfect, Winona replied, with a tender look in her eyes. The rest of the day had gone on relatively smoothly. Andy was able to get through all their jobs with little mishaps, and truly felt productive. All the while, they anticipated what the following evening would look like. They had been able to cross paths with Cece, and in a stuttering, stammering mess, had managed to ask Cece out, to which she very eagerly said yes to. Different scenarios and situations looped over and over in their head, everything that could go well, and everything that could go horribly wrong. They thought of what they would wear to dinner, what Cece would wear. Annie was very good at hiding their true emotions, so while a passerby would assume they were collected and relaxed, in reality, Andy's stomach was doing flip-flops and filled to the brim with butterflies. Finally, the day had come to an end, with the sun already beginning to set. Andy hopped out of the elevator among the cluster of ANN employees rushing to head home and enjoy their night. Just as the automatic doors opened, Andy felt a tap on their shoulder and looked behind them. Just as they expected, it was Cece. I'll see you later tonight, Cece exclaimed cheerfully, which made Andy smile and blush just a tad. Same here, Andy replied bashfully, and watched Cece walk away swiftly down the sidewalk for a few seconds before making their way in the opposite direction to make the commute home. The moon was now on full display, high in the sky above the city. Lines of street lamps were now turned on, offering some extra light for the people roaming the streets. Restaurants and bars were now abuzz with activity, shoppers exiting high-end boutiques and jewelry stores with countless shopping bags dangling on their arms. And all the while, a few couples could be seen roaming the streets, hand in hand. On one particular street was the restaurant Andy and Cece were going to meet at, the Velvet Inn. This old but well-known establishment was a one-story brick building. The name of the restaurant could be seen in neon lighting. Windows were framed with red curtains, giving onlookers glimpses into the extravagant meals being served. And a few tables were set outside, with large heat lamps set up to provide some warmth during the chilly night. Overall, it was quite the swanky restaurant. No wonder Francine wanted to go out with Winona tonight. Andy had changed out of their work attire for something at least a bit more formal. They had a red fisherman's sweater atop a white-collared shirt, khaki pants, and brown loafers. They wrapped their red checkered scarf a bit tighter around their neck, the cold weather still very much apparent. They were still standing awkwardly near the front entrance of the restaurant, waiting for Cece. It wasn't very long until they heard a familiar set of light footsteps and looked up from the concrete sidewalk. Cece was approaching closer, with Andy slowly able to take in her appearance. She too had also changed out of her pink sweater from earlier that day. She was wearing a simple, slightly ruffled light mint green dress with a floral pattern. She had on white flats and a simple white cardigan. She almost looked cute in Andy's eyes. "Hey, sorry I took so long. I was in a taxi and we got caught in a bit of traffic," Cece tried to explain, slightly out of breath. "No worries, you're right on time. It was me who decided to show up 30 minutes early in the freezing cold," Andy chuckled. "So, shall we go in?" Feeling a surge of courage, they offered their hand for Cece to take. "We shall," Cece replied with a bright smile and interlocked her hand in theirs as they were directed to their table. The atmosphere of the restaurant was quite a spectacle to behold. The entire restaurant was cast in a dim, almost red lighting, creating a calming atmosphere for its guests. Waiters carried hot trays of delicious-looking food back and forth through the maze of tables. Bartenders were busy mixing, pouring, and serving cocktails for those sitting at the bar. Each table had a perfectly smooth white cloth draped over it, a small tableside lamp, and shiny cutlery arranged neatly in front of each sitting area. Andy and Cece had been seated for quite a while, ordered drinks and their meal, and were quietly chattering amongst themselves. For the most part, it was primarily them recapping how their day went, what the most recent workplace gossip was, and what interesting stories that they covered at work. Eventually, their chatter had reached a natural lull, leaving behind a bit of an awkward silence. "So, any particular reason why you wanted to hang out tonight?" Cece suddenly asked out of nowhere, almost making Andy spit out the glass of lemonade they were sipping on. No reason, just thought it would be nice to catch up, you know? Why do you ask?" Andy stammered out. They were waiting for the perfect opportunity to bring up the question of actually dating in the future, but the question almost seemed to be stuck in their throat. "Oh, no reason. You just seemed like you had something you wanted to tell me," Cece noted, before snacking on some of the free bread that was provided to them before their actual food was served. Meanwhile, Andy looked down nervously. Their hands suddenly felt clammy, and their heart began to race faster than ever. Why couldn't they just ask Cece? This was the whole reason why they decided to ask her out in the first place. This is what they wanted, right? To be a couple? That's what everyone wanted. That's what Andy was supposed to want. "I'm sorry," Andy suddenly exclaimed out of nowhere, their voice strained and anxious. Cece looked at them, a bit stunned at the sudden outburst. "Sorry for what?" Cece asked gently. "This was a mistake. I don't know why I thought this would be a good idea. It was Winona that suggested I take you out tonight so that I could... Ask me out?" Cece suddenly interrupted, her voice with a hint of realization. She even sounded a bit flustered. Andy looked up to see Cece's eyes just a tad bit wider and shinier, her face now blushing a dark shade of teal. She seemed to get a good idea of what Andy supposedly wanted to get out of this dinner. "I mean, that's what I thought I wanted, but now, I don't know. I don't think that's what I want," Andy replied quietly. There was a moment of silence between the two individuals. Cece was always known among her friends for being highly observant, being able to notice things and people in ways most others couldn't. Cece took in everything. Andy's darting eyes, their strained expression, their fidgeting hands on the table, and the flush of green on their cheeks. "You know, didn't you say Francine was paying for our meal? I'd hate to be the one to spoil such a nice evening," Cece began, with Andy looking up in surprise. "Why don't you and I enjoy this lovely dinner, and then we can talk somewhere a little more comfortable?" Cece suggested. I'd like that, Andy said, relieved. They couldn't help but admit a big swanky place like this was a bit much to talk about such personal matters. The least they could do was just enjoy their night and live in the moment. Surprisingly, the rest of the night had gone quite smoothly. Their food came piping hot and was probably one of the most exquisite meals Andy had ever had. The two were able to pick back up a conversation at a smooth pace. They exchanged stories and laughed, just like how they always would on any other day. An hour later, the two began to wrap up their dinner. The city was still lively late into the night. Cece led the way, with Andy following close behind. As they walked a couple blocks from the restaurant, Andy wasn't sure what Cece meant by going somewhere more comfortable. They had somewhat of an idea, but they couldn't be too sure. They kept walking for a few minutes before they had made their way to one of the entrances of a large park. It was a typical hangout spot that Andy and Cece had shared many fond memories of in the past. Even in the dark, tall street lamps cast their bright light against the tall trees and beautiful flowers. A few people could be seen walking along the winding paths, but otherwise it was pretty quiet. Andy's shoulders relaxed, knowing they were somewhere they felt safe and at ease in. Nature was always an important part of the Bullhorns' life, given that they grew up in a quiet village, away from the bustling cities. The two made their way to a spot they frequently occupied whenever they hung out at the park. It was a large, sturdy sycamore tree in a cleared field. Its thousands of little green leaves danced gently in the evening breeze, and tufts of soft grass poking out from the earth below. It was a solitary spot, but not necessarily isolating or lonely. It was a place where one could simply be one with nature, away from the hustle and bustle of city life. Andy and Cece sat down under the tree, leaning against the textured, sturdy bark for a few quiet minutes. Cece broke the silence with another unexpected question. So, do you like me, Andy? That's the thing. I think I do, but I also don't. Andy tried piecing together their thoughts in an awkward manner. Their feelings were something that was hard to put into words perfectly. They didn't know how to approach this conversation, but they wanted to try. If I'm being honest, I have always admired you, Cece. Ever since we met, you've been nothing but kind to me. You're funny and considerate, and you're always looking out for me. Andy rambled on, while Cece just listened silently, smiling at their affectionate words. I get, excited to see you. I look forward to work because it means I get to see you, even just for a moment. I like who I am around you, and I want to be with you all the time. And I tell myself these things, and I think, and other people think, isn't that just what a crush is? And when I try to imagine us being together like that, as a couple, it just doesn't feel right. Like, why do I have to change how I see our relationship in order to feel the way I feel? To justify why I want to hang out with you in the ways I want to? Is friendship somehow not as strong or as good as romantic love? Is something wrong with me? Is it wrong that I don't want to date you? Andy finished, their words becoming more emotional and frantic. They were expecting Cece to jump in with some quick retort or somehow feel offended by their words. But the entire time, Cece just listened and looked at Andy. Not with a defensiveness or anything negative of the sort, just a curious, empathetic stare from someone who just simply wanted to understand. Sorry, I think I got carried away. None of what I said made any sense, did it? Andy said pessimistically. No. I kind of get what you mean. And if I can be truthful here, I may or may not have found you cute. Just a little bit. Cece replied bashfully, scrunching up her shoulders up to her neck, head. Wait. Seriously? Yeah. Surprise? Well, then, what about all the times you, touch me? I don't know if you realize it, but I almost never see you being as affectionate to other people the way you are to me. Well, that's just how I am to a lot of people. It's a subconscious thing. I don't really think about it until people bring it up. I'm clingy, okay? But anyway, I'm very flattered that you wanted to try and ask me out. And for the record, there's nothing wrong with you if that's not what you want. If anything, I'm a little relieved.
You are?
It's just, I won't lie when I say I can be very romantic a lot of the time. I'm always dreaming of the day I meet that perfect someone I can ride off into the sunset with. And when I was younger, I did have a few people trying to pursue me every now and then. I liked the attention, but when I really try to picture myself being with them in that way, me having the label of a girlfriend, I don't know, like you said, it's never been something I really want. Like, the thought of romance is nice to think about, but that's all it is to me. Just a thought. Andy took in her words with stunned eyes. Her words seemed to mirror exactly what they were trying to convey, just in a more succinct manner. It was honestly very impressive. But it's not like I'm missing something from my life. I'm not missing out on love. I love my friends, my family, my job, nature, and so much more. I have relationships with so many people and things, and none is better or not as fulfilling as the other. Cece finished her spiel and scooted a little closer to Andy to get a good look at them. And you, Andy Helm, are truly a special person in my life. You're one of the most calculated, relaxed, and overall nicest people I know. Look, we don't need to rush anything. Maybe in a year or so things could change and we do end up wanting to be partners. Or maybe nothing changes at all. Regardless, whatever we are to each other, whether it's platonic, romantic, or maybe some secret third thing, we'll figure it out at our own pace, together. Cece reassured Andy, grabbing their hand and interlocking their fingers with their own. The gesture, along with Cece's gentle tone of voice, brought some comfort to Andy.
Is it really that simple?
Andy asked hesitantly. Were they really getting so worked up over something so obvious? Really, Cece replied, smiling even brighter than the moon herself.
Oh man,
Andy let out a wide sigh of relief, only to suddenly plop down onto Cece's lap and close their eyes.
Is it weird to say I love you?
Andy asked, looking up at Cece. I don't know. Is it weird to say I love you too? Cece replied smugly, reaching up to brush some hair out of Andy's eyes. Andy was feeling so many things at once at this very moment. Relief, embarrassment, a bit of confusion, but above all else, happy. No matter what kind of feelings they held for the flip side, no matter what their official relationship status was, that didn't change the bond they shared. Sure, it wasn't a bond they could categorize into a perfect box, and it might cause some confusion at work. But at the end of the day, love can never truly be defined, can it? It's a word that can mean so many things to so many different people. Unwavering devotion, attraction, or maybe just finding something or someone really cool. No matter what it means or how it's experienced, there was no denying that it was something Andy Helm and Cece Gray felt for each other. And no one could define that connection but themselves.
Hello, this is Lisa, or Lisi, whatever you know me by. And if you have made it this far, I would like to thank you so much for listening to this silly little story of mine. I've spent the past 3 weeks working on this, from writing the story to narrating to cobbling together this video into something cohesive. I have a lot of people to thank. I just want to take this moment to thank my friends, just people that know me on Instagram and Discord, for expressing their love and their support and their hype for ANN, for the ANN crew. It just makes me so happy. These characters and this world, this is a project that means a great deal to me, and I had always hoped to reach a point where I could tell a story with ANN and these characters, and this is my first time doing something like this, and there's a lot that I can definitely improve upon, but I'm just really happy to be able to get this out there and for you guys to really immerse you guys into this world that I've made for so long. And this may or may not set a really bad precedent for future narrations like this, but we'll just have to see. It all depends on, my motivation and the time. Again, I spent 3 weeks on this, but I mean, we'll see. But I mean, this is definitely not the last you will see of the ANN crew. I have plenty more ideas of stories I can tell with them and funny little videos I can make of them, but we'll just have to see. But again, thank you so much for watching, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video.